The night shift always felt heavier than the day. The streets were quiet, the air colder, and silence carried its own kind of weight when you were inside an ambulance waiting for a call. Daniel sat by the window, his eyes following the faint glow of streetlights that blurred through the mist. To anyone who looked at him, he was just another tired paramedic, one more uniform in the endless sea of emergency workers who gave their nights to strangers. But inside him was a storm no one could see. His face gave nothing away. Calm, steady, professional. That was Daniel's mask, the one he had worn for years. He was known for his composure, even during the worst calls. People said he had a way of holding broken bodies together with his bare hands. What no one knew was that his own heart had been broken long before he ever wore the uniform. The radio crackled and his partner for the night, Alex, reached forward to adjust the volume. Alex was new, transferred only a few months ago, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who wasn't afraid of the world. His voice was light, sometimes teasing, often warm, and Daniel had noticed how the nurses smiled a little too long when he spoke. Daniel avoided those moments. He tried to keep his head down, tried not to notice the curve of Alex's grin or the way his laugh lingered after a bad call. It was safer that way. For years, Daniel had lived in the shadows of silence, not because he wanted to, but because he had learned that silence meant survival. He had been told since he was a boy that real men didn't bend, didn't break, didn't confess to feelings that would make the world see them as weak or wrong. And so he buried it all. The ambulance moved through the city, chasing sirens, saving lives. But what Daniel couldn't save was the part of himself he locked away every day, the part that longed for someone to look past the uniform and see the man inside. That night, after one particularly messy call, they sat in the vehicle catching their breath. Blood was still on Daniel's gloves, and his heartbeat had not yet slowed. The boy they pulled from the wreckage had barely survived, and Daniel had felt the life slipping through his hands before the monitor beeped back hope. Adrenaline always left him shaky, though no one would know it. Then it happened. Alex's hand brushed against his arm when he leaned over to check the paperwork. A small, meaningless touch, yet it sent Daniel's chest into chaos. He pulled back quickly, covering it with a cough, pretending to shuffle supplies. Alex didn't say anything, but there was a look in his eyes, a spark that Daniel had spent his whole life running from. He knew that look. He had dreamed of it, feared it, wanted it all at once. He hated how his body betrayed him, how his breath caught in his throat, how badly he wanted to freeze time and live in that fraction of a second. But he couldn't. Not him. Not here. The ambulance engine hummed beneath them as the city outside went on, unaware of the quiet battle inside Daniel's chest. He told himself it was nothing. Just a tired mind, a long night, an accident. Yet when Alex spoke again, soft and low, something in Daniel shifted. "You're quiet tonight," Alex said, not looking at him but staring through the windshield. Daniel wanted to reply, wanted to explain that silence was the only way he knew how to survive, but all that left his lips was, just tired. Alex didn't push, didn't question, but the silence between them was different now. It was thick, filled with something Daniel wasn't ready to name. Hours passed, calls came and went, but the weight of that moment stayed with him. Every time their shoulders brushed when they moved inside the tight ambulance, every time their eyes met too long, Daniel felt the walls he had built trembling. He thought about his father's voice, harsh and unforgiving, the one that carved fear into him as a boy. He thought about the friends he had lost when whispers began in school, how quickly people turned when they suspected. And now here he was, a grown man, respected in his field, trusted with lives, yet still living in fear of being seen. He told himself he could control it, that nothing would happen, that he wouldn't let it. But deep down, he knew the truth. Something had already begun the moment Alex's hand brushed his arm. The secret he had carried for so long was no longer safe inside him. It was waking, restless, and hungry for air. And Daniel, for the first time in years, was terrified not of losing control, but of what it would mean if he finally let himself feel. Daniel tried to push the memory of that touch away, but it clung to him long after the shift ended. He drove home as dawn began to creep across the horizon, the streets washed in that pale light that made everything look quieter than it really was. The city seemed to hold its breath, but inside his head there was no silence, only noise. He kept replaying the moment when Alex's hand had brushed against his arm, the way his chest had tightened, the way he couldn't breathe right for minutes after. It shouldn't have meant anything. He had told himself that 1,000 times before. But for Daniel, everything meant something when it came from a man. It was because he had spent his entire life starving himself of the smallest moments of closeness, that even a glance, a smile, a casual brush of skin, became too much to hold inside. When he reached his small apartment, he sat in his car longer than he meant to, staring at the building he lived in. It was quiet there too. No lights left on, no voices waiting for him inside, no one asking how his night had been. He had grown used to the loneliness, though it still cut into him at times. Unlocking his door, he let himself in and dropped his bag on the floor. The walls felt bare, cold, like a shell that was never fully lived in. He turned on the shower, trying to wash away the blood and sweat of the night, but no water could wash away the weight of his memories. When he closed his eyes, he didn't see the accident, the boy they had saved, or even the flashing lights. All he saw was Alex. His smile. His voice. The way he had looked at him when he said, "You're quiet tonight." Daniel leaned against the tiles and let the water pour over him. He had kept himself locked away for so long that he barely knew who he was outside of the uniform. The paramedic everyone respected was not the same man who stood trembling in his own shower, too afraid to admit who he really was. He had been running from himself since he was a teenager. The memories hit him hard, like they always did when he felt weak. He remembered the look on his father's face when he was 13 and had been caught holding a friend's hand too long. It wasn't even anything, just the warmth of a moment between two boys too young to understand it, but his father had looked at him with disgust. He remembered the words, sharp as knives, "Don't ever let me see that again. You hear me? You'll ruin yourself. You'll ruin this family." His mother had been silent, her eyes downcast, as if pretending not to hear would erase the wound those words left behind. That was the night Daniel learned how to hide. He started lowering his voice, hardening his posture, forcing smiles around girls he felt nothing for. He trained himself to act like the boy his father wanted him to be. And over the years, that act turned into a prison. He dated women when he was older, not out of love but because it kept the questions away. He learned how to kiss without feeling, how to smile in photographs with girls whose hands he never wanted to hold, how to let people believe he was normal. The word normal haunted him. It was a cage he could never fit into, but it was safer than showing the truth. And now, years later, he was still hiding. Only now, hiding wasn't protecting him, it was suffocating him. Daniel sat on the couch, towel around his shoulders, staring at the empty space across from him. He felt like a shadow of a man, present but not alive. And then, without meaning to, his mind drifted back to Alex again. The way Alex's laugh broke tension in the ambulance. The way he spoke with ease, like he didn't care what people thought. Daniel wondered what it would be like to live that way, to stop running, to let himself be free. He wondered what Alex would think if he knew the truth, if he knew how hard Daniel had fought against himself all these years. He wanted to believe Alex would understand, that maybe he would even accept him. But fear spoke louder. Fear told him that people always turned, just like his father had, just like those boys at school who laughed behind his back when they called him soft. Fear told him that if he let anyone see, he would lose everything he had built, the respect, the career, the fragile mask of stability. Yet for all the fear, something inside him burned quietly. It was small, like a candle in a dark room, but it was there. It was the part of him that longed to feel alive, the part that wanted to be touched without shame, the part that wanted to hear his name spoken softly in the dark. That part of him was awake now, and no matter how hard he tried to bury it, it refused to be silenced again. The next evening when Daniel returned to work, he caught himself searching for Alex without meaning to. It was dangerous, he knew, but his eyes betrayed him. When he finally saw him across the hall, his chest tightened in that same uncontrollable way. Alex was talking to a nurse, laughing, his hands moving as he spoke. Daniel turned away quickly, afraid of being caught staring. He hated himself for it, this constant running, this constant hiding, but he didn't know how to stop. For years, he had been a man of control, calm under pressure, steady when the world fell apart. But inside, he was anything but steady. Inside, he was a storm of silence, a man who had spent too long pretending not to want the one thing he had always wanted most, to be held without fear, to be loved without shame, to be seen without hiding. The call came just after midnight, one of those frantic dispatches that shook you awake no matter how tired you were. Daniel and Alex were already on the road before the address even finished echoing through the radio. A car accident. Multiple victims. The kind of situation that could make or break the night. Daniel's hands moved with practiced precision as he checked the equipment in the back, his body on autopilot, though his mind was anything but steady. Alex was behind the wheel, eyes sharp on the road, but even in that focus Daniel could feel his presence filling the space. It was a quiet intensity, the kind that both steadied and unsettled him at the same time. When they arrived, chaos spilled across the street. Flashing lights painted everything in red and blue, and broken glass glittered like cruel stars on the asphalt. A car had wrapped itself around a pole, its frame bent in ways metal was never meant to bend. Inside, a teenage boy lay half-conscious, blood pooling near his head. Daniel's training kicked in. His fear, his doubts, his secret, they all vanished in moments like this. His world narrowed to the weight of another person's life in his hands. He climbed into the wreckage, his voice calm as he spoke to the boy, reassuring him even though he wasn't sure the boy could hear. His gloved hand steadied the neck, checked the airway, worked methodically. Outside, Alex was coordinating with firemen, his voice firm and commanding as he made space for the extraction. Then suddenly Alex was beside him, sliding into the cramped space, their shoulders pressing close as they worked together. In that moment, their movements became one rhythm, a wordless dance of trust and urgency. The boy's pulse was weak, fluttering under Daniel's fingers. The fear clawed at him, but he buried it deep, focusing on the breath, the monitor, the fragile thread of life slipping through his hands. And then, just as panic threatened, the machine beeped steady again. Relief crashed through him, and he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Alex's hand landed on his arm, firm, grounding, the kind of touch that said, "We did it, he's alive." It lasted only a second, maybe less, but for Daniel it felt like the world stopped moving. When the boy was safely in the ambulance, hooked up, breathing, Daniel sat against the wall inside, his heart still racing. Alex was across from him, writing notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel tried not to look, tried to steady his own breathing, but his eyes betrayed him. He saw the sweat along Alex's jawline, the veins in his forearm as he held the pen, the way his lips pressed together as he focused. He told himself to look away, but he couldn't. Then Alex's eyes lifted suddenly and caught his. For a split second, neither looked away. The air between them shifted, charged, heavy with something unsaid. Daniel's stomach tightened. He forced himself to glance down, pretending to check the foreline, but the damage was done. That moment lingered, refusing to fade, even after the boy was delivered safely to the hospital and the chaos settled. On the ride back, the ambulance hummed with silence. Daniel stared out the window, the city lights smearing into streaks as they passed. He could feel Alex watching him, though he didn't dare turn. His pulse betrayed him, each beat too loud, too fast. Then came the words, quiet but clear. "You don't let people in, do you?" Alex's voice wasn't accusatory, just soft, like an observation. Daniel froze. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but no sound came out. He could only manage a small shake of his head. Alex didn't push. He just leaned back, eyes still on him, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You don't have to. Not with everyone. Just, with someone." The words sank into Daniel like a weight and a lifeline all at once. He wanted to respond, to say something, but fear wrapped around his throat like a noose. All he could manage was a tight nod before looking away again. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, full, alive with meaning Daniel didn't want to admit. Later, when they parked the ambulance back at the station, Alex lingered. He moved slower than usual, gathering his things, his eyes flicking toward Daniel as though waiting for something. Daniel busied himself with equipment, desperate to appear unaffected, though his hands trembled slightly as he packed supplies into place. When Alex finally spoke again, his voice was even lower, almost hesitant. "You don't have to be afraid around me." That was it. Simple, direct, yet it unraveled something inside Daniel he had kept tied tight for years. He couldn't respond. His throat burned with all the words he couldn't say. You don't know me, you don't know what it costs, you don't know how dangerous it is to want this. Instead, he turned, gave a small nod that was more like a surrender than an answer, and left. Alone in his car later, his hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to cry, to let out all the years of silence, but nothing came. Just the memory of Alex's hand on his arm, steady and warm, replaying in his mind like a secret he could never escape. For the first time in so many years, Daniel wasn't terrified of dying on the job. He was terrified of living long enough to finally feel what it meant to be seen. The station was quiet that night, unusually still, as if the world outside had paused to give them a moment they didn't know they were about to need. The calls had slowed, paperwork filled the silence, and for once there was no chaos to drown in. Daniel sat at the back of the ambulance, his pen scratching across a form, trying to look busy while his mind spiraled. He had been avoiding Alex since the accident, offering quick nods and clipped answers, never giving him space to ask more questions. But Alex had a way of slipping past defenses without even trying. That night, he leaned against the open door of the ambulance, arms crossed, eyes steady on Daniel, as though he had been waiting for the right moment. "You know," Alex said quietly, "I used to be like you." Daniel looked up sharply, startled by the words, his pen freezing mid-stroke. "Closed off. Always pretending I was fine. Hiding the truth because I thought the world would chew me up if I didn't." He spoke casually, like he wasn't dropping a stone into still water, but Daniel felt the ripples immediately. He tried to look away, to keep his eyes on the paper, but Alex's voice wouldn't let him escape. "I thought I could live like that forever. But it eats you alive. Piece by piece." Daniel's chest tightened, his pulse quickening as though every syllable was aimed directly at the secret he had buried. He didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to. But Alex kept talking, not to push, not to demand, just to share. He told him about being younger, about the first time he realized he was different. The laughter in school hallways, the whispered words that carried cruelty. He told him about the fear that came every time he thought someone might find out. And then, softer, he told him about the night he decided he couldn't live hiding anymore, about the moment he told his family and how some turned away, but others stayed. Daniel sat frozen, caught between wanting to cover his ears and wanting to hear every word. Alex wasn't looking at him like a confession demanded something in return. He was just honest. Open in a way Daniel hadn't seen before. It was dangerous, the kind of honesty that made walls crumble, but it was also magnetic. He hated how badly he wanted to step closer, how badly he wanted to feel what Alex felt when he spoke so freely, how badly he wanted to believe there was life on the other side of fear. Alex shifted slightly, stepping inside the ambulance now, closing the space between them. Their knees almost brushed, their breaths almost mingled in the cool night air. Daniel's heart thudded so loud he was sure it could be heard. Alex lowered his voice, gentle but sure. "You don't have to tell me anything. Not until you're ready. But you should know. I see you. Those 3 words tore through Daniel like lightning. He had been invisible his whole life, or at least that's how it felt. He had worked so hard to disappear behind masks, behind steady hands and professional calm, behind the armor of silence. To hear someone say they saw him, it was unbearable and beautiful at once. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his chest aching with the weight of it. His hand trembled slightly as he set the pen down, unable to pretend any longer. He wanted to speak, to say something, but words failed him. Then Alex moved, slow and deliberate, his hand brushing down Daniel's arm, pausing at his wrist before sliding lower, resting lightly on his hand. It wasn't forceful, wasn't demanding, just a question in the form of touch. Daniel froze, breath caught somewhere between panic and longing. No one had touched him like that in years, not with intention, not with meaning. His instinct was to pull back, to run, to bury the moment before it could bloom. But he couldn't move. He sat there trembling, caught in the storm of his own desire and fear. For the briefest second, Daniel let himself imagine what it would be like if he didn't pull away. If he let the touch linger, if he leaned in, if he stopped fighting the part of himself he had strangled for so long. It felt dangerous. It felt like falling. But it also felt like air after drowning, like warmth after years of cold. His lips parted slightly, words almost forming, but fear snatched them away. He pulled his hand back quickly, standing as though the seat burned him. I should check supplies, he muttered, his voice cracking with a nervous edge he hated. Alex didn't chase, didn't scold, didn't even frown. He just nodded softly, his expression unreadable but kind. Okay. We'll check them together. His voice held no judgment, only patience, and that, somehow, cut deeper than anything else could have. Daniel busied himself with bags and equipment, fumbling more than usual, his fingers clumsy on items he knew by heart. He could feel Alex beside him, close but not pressing, steady as though offering silent space. That night, when Daniel finally got home, he collapsed onto his bed without even undressing, staring at the ceiling as though it might give him answers. He replayed the moment again and again, the touch, the closeness, the words. I see you. No one had ever said that to him. No one had dared to look past the mask. He should have felt relief, but instead he felt stripped bare, vulnerable in a way that left him trembling. Yet buried beneath the fear was something else. Something fragile but undeniable. Hope. For the first time, the possibility of being known didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like the faint outline of a life he had never believed he deserved. Daniel avoided Alex for days after that night, throwing himself into the routine of work with a desperation that almost felt like punishment. He volunteered for extra tasks, buried himself in paperwork, stayed longer than he needed to at the station, anything to keep from being caught in silence with Alex again. But avoidance was never clean. They still rode together, still moved through calls side by side, their bodies forced into the same rhythm in the tight ambulance. The difference now was that every glance, every accidental touch, every word held an unbearable weight. Daniel felt his chest clench every time Alex's shoulder brushed against his. He told himself to keep calm, to stay professional, to build back the walls Alex had shaken. But the walls were thinner now, and cracks kept spreading no matter how hard he tried to patch them. It was worst in the quiet moments. During late-night drives when the city stretched out endless and the only sounds were the tires on asphalt and the faint hum of the radio. Daniel would grip the steering wheel or sit stiff in the passenger seat, his body aching from holding itself together. And Alex would glance at him sometimes, just long enough to let Daniel know he saw through him, though he never said anything outright. That silence was almost worse than words. It was like Alex was waiting, giving him space, refusing to force him open. But patience was its own kind of pressure. It made Daniel feel seen in ways that were both comforting and terrifying. Sleep became difficult. When he finally closed his eyes after shifts, his dreams betrayed him. He dreamed of touches that lasted longer than a second, of laughter shared without fear, of sitting close enough that the space between them disappeared. He woke from those dreams with his heart racing and shame pressing down heavy on his chest. He hated himself for wanting so badly, for needing what he had spent his whole life denying. The shame was familiar, an old companion he thought he had grown numb to, but now it hurt worse because it wasn't abstract anymore. It had a face. A name. A laugh that haunted him even in silence. One night after a long call, when the patient had been delivered and the adrenaline had faded, Daniel lingered outside the hospital doors, trying to slow his breathing before going back to the ambulance. The night air was cool, but sweat clung to his neck. He felt brittle, like one wrong word might shatter him completely. Alex came out moments later, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Without asking, he handed one to Daniel. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Daniel flinched so slightly it was almost invisible, but Alex noticed. Of course he noticed. He always noticed. "You don't have to run from me," Alex said softly, his voice carrying no accusation, only quiet truth. Daniel's stomach tightened, and he stared at the steam rising from the cup, afraid to meet his eyes. "I'm not running," he whispered, though the words sounded false even to himself. Alex didn't argue. He just sighed gently and leaned against the wall, sipping his coffee as though he could wait there forever. The silence stretched between them, heavy with what neither dared say. Finally, Alex broke it, his tone calm but firm. "You can't live like this forever. Pretending you don't feel, pretending it's not killing you. I've been there. I know what it does." Daniel's chest burned. He wanted to tell him to stop, to let him stay buried, to leave him alone with his secrets. But at the same time, his body trembled with the hunger to be understood, to have someone share the weight he had carried alone for years. The words slipped out before he could stop them, raw and quiet. "You don't understand." His voice cracked, fragile like glass about to break. "You don't know what it's like to build your whole life around hiding. To lie every single day just to keep breathing." Alex's gaze softened. "I do understand. More than you think." He set his cup aside, stepping closer, his presence warm and steady. Daniel froze as Alex's hand hovered near his, not touching this time, just waiting. "I'm not asking you to tell the world," Alex said. "I'm not asking you to stand on a rooftop and shout it. I just don't want you to keep pretending with me. I don't want to be another mask you wear." The words cut deep, and Daniel's eyes stung with the burn of unshed tears. He clenched his fists, his body shaking with the war inside him. He wanted to reach out, to accept the hand that was offered, but fear screamed louder. Fear of his father's voice, fear of whispered rumors at the station, fear of losing the fragile respect he had fought to earn. Yet beneath the fear was the aching truth: he had never wanted anyone the way he wanted Alex. That truth was suffocating him more than the hiding ever had. When he finally spoke, it was a broken confession. "I can't. I don't know how." His voice was raw, trembling with the weight of years unsaid. Alex didn't push further, didn't demand more. He just gave a small nod, his eyes filled with something between patience and sorrow. "Then let me help you learn." The offer was simple, but it left Daniel reeling. He turned away quickly, unable to face the kindness in Alex's eyes, because kindness felt more dangerous than cruelty. cruelty he knew how to survive. Kindness made him want to surrender. That night, when Daniel lay in bed, the silence of his apartment felt unbearable. The words replayed again and again. I don't want to be another mask you wear. He thought of Alex's hand hovering near his, the promise in his voice, the way he never pushed but never walked away either. For the first time in his life, Daniel began to wonder if maybe he didn't have to spend forever alone with his secret. Maybe there was a way forward, terrifying and uncertain, but real. Daniel thought that once the words had finally left his mouth and once Alex had kissed him without hesitation, things would become easier. For a short while, they did. The nights carried a warmth that had never been there before, and the heavy burden on his chest felt lighter when Alex was near. But the world doesn't stay still, and secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of slipping through cracks. It started small, with whispers at the station. A look held too long, a laugh that lingered between calls, a shoulder brushing in ways that didn't look accidental anymore. People notice. They always notice, especially when they're searching for something to talk about during slow nights. Daniel could feel the shift, the glances exchanged when he walked into the room, the quiet conversations that would stop suddenly when he drew near. Fear that he thought he had left behind began creeping back into his chest, squeezing tighter with each passing day. At home, the pressure grew worse. His father had always been sharp, able to read him even when Daniel tried to stay guarded. Over dinner one evening, his father studied him with narrowed eyes, noticing changes that no one else in the family seemed to see. "You've been different," his father said slowly, suspicion dripping in his tone. "Distracted. Something you're not telling us." The question wasn't innocent, and Daniel knew it. He felt his stomach drop, his fork heavy in his hand. His mother looked down at her plate, as if silence could protect her from the storm brewing in the room. Daniel forced a weak smile, muttered something about stress at work, and his father let it go, but the suspicion in his eyes lingered long after. Back at work, Alex remained patient, but patience couldn't shield them from tension forever. He didn't like being hidden, even if he understood why. One night, after a particularly draining call, Alex finally spoke what had been simmering between them. They sat in the ambulance, parked under the glow of a streetlight, both of them exhausted but unable to rest. Alex's voice broke the silence, quiet but firm. "Daniel, I can't keep being your secret." The word struck harder than Daniel wanted to admit. He turned to him quickly, panic flashing in his chest. "It's not like that. You don't understand," but Alex cut him off, his tone calm but unyielding. "No, I do understand. I know what it's like to be afraid. I know what it's like to hide. I've done it. But I won't live like that again. I can't be with someone who only loves me in the shadows." Daniel's throat tightened, his voice cracking as he tried to explain. "It's not that simple for me. You think I can just walk into the world and tell them? You don't know what it costs. You don't know what I'll lose." His voice shook with anger, but beneath it was desperation, the raw fear of a man clinging to the mask that had kept him alive for years. Alex's eyes softened, but his words stayed firm. "You'll lose yourself if you keep hiding. That's worse than losing anyone else." The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel felt the weight of his own heart pressing against his ribs, suffocating him. He turned away, unable to face Alex, his eyes fixed on the floor. He wanted to argue, to push back, but deep down he knew Alex was right. He had spent so long building walls that he had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without them. And now, faced with the possibility of losing the one person who made him feel alive, he was forced to confront the truth he had been avoiding. That night, after Alex dropped him off, Daniel sat in his car for hours, hands gripping the steering wheel, tears slipping silently down his face. The thought of losing Alex terrified him, but the thought of stepping into the world openly was even more terrifying. He was caught in the middle, torn between the life he had always known and the life he longed for but didn't believe he deserved. He walked into his apartment and collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. He could still hear Alex's voice echoing in his head, "I can't keep being your secret star." It broke him because he knew Alex was right, yet fear held him prisoner. His chest ached with the weight of everything he hadn't said, everything he had buried for years. And for the first time, Daniel realized that the choice was no longer about whether he could keep hiding. The choice was about whether he was willing to lose Alex, the only person who had ever truly seen him, in order to keep pretending. The morning Daniel finally decided he couldn't run anymore was unlike any other, yet everything about it felt heavier. He hadn't slept. The night had been long and restless, haunted by Alex's words replaying in his mind like a broken record. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but the ache in his chest was sharper than the fatigue in his body. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at the man looking back at him. His uniform hung neatly on his shoulders, his badge pinned where it always was, but he didn't recognize the eyes staring back. They were tired, yes, but more than that, they were tired of hiding, tired of bending under a weight that no one else could see. He realized then that he could not keep living like this, half alive, half suffocated, fearing shadows that might never come. He thought of Alex, of the warmth in his eyes, the steadiness in his voice, the way he had said "you'll lose yourself if you keep hiding." It felt less like a warning now and more like prophecy. At the station, whispers still circled. Conversations hushed when he walked by, and he knew they were talking about him, or at least about them. The fear came, as it always did, crawling up his spine like ice, but today he carried something else with it. Resolve. Alex avoided his eyes during the shift, focusing instead on the tasks at hand, his face unreadable. It stung, that distance, but Daniel understood. He had pushed him too far, asked too much of his patience. If he didn't act now, he knew he would lose him. And losing Alex was no longer an option he could accept. The call that changed everything came late in the afternoon, a bad accident on the freeway. Adrenaline surged through Daniel as they rushed to the scene, but beneath it all was a quiet clarity. As they worked side by side, pulling someone from the wreckage, his eyes caught Alex's for the briefest moment, and in that instant, Daniel knew what he had to do. It wasn't about timing anymore. It was about truth. Life was too fragile, too unpredictable to keep waiting for the perfect moment. There would never be one. When the shift ended, Daniel didn't go home. He asked Alex to meet him outside, away from the noise of the station, away from the curious eyes that followed them. The sky was painted in fading light, streaks of orange and purple dissolving into the night. Alex stood with his arms crossed, guarded, his jaw tight. Daniel's hands shook as he stepped closer, his heart slamming against his ribs. His throat was dry, but he forced the words out, each one carrying the weight of years of silence. I can't keep hiding anymore. Not from you. Not from them. Not from myself. I'm in love with you, Alex." For a moment, Alex didn't move. His expression was unreadable, and fear clawed at Daniel's chest, threatening to crush him. But then Alex's eyes softened, his arms falling to his sides, and he let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for months. "Do you know how long I've been waiting to hear you say that?" The relief that swept through Daniel was almost too much to bear. His knees felt weak, but he didn't look away. He stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his hand reaching for Alex's as if it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first time in public, he didn't care who saw. He didn't care about whispers or judgment or the fallout that might come tomorrow. All he cared about was the man standing in front of him, the man who had been patient enough to wait, strong enough to stay, and brave enough to demand the truth. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the quiet, hesitant ones before. This one was fierce, desperate, alive. It was a declaration, a promise, a surrender. People might have seen, people might have talked, but none of it mattered anymore. In that moment, Daniel felt freer than he ever had in his entire life. The weight that had lived in his chest for years cracked open and vanished into the night air, leaving only the warmth of love in its place. Later, when they pulled apart, Daniel's eyes glistened. His voice trembled, but it carried conviction. "I don't know what will happen next. I don't know how people will react. But I know one thing, I'm not going back into the shadows. Not anymore. Not without you." Alex's hand tightened around his gaze steady and sure. "Then we'll face whatever comes. Together." For the first time in a lifetime of fear, Daniel felt the ground solid beneath his feet. He wasn't a man living half a life anymore. He wasn't just a paramedic with a dark secret. He was Daniel, a man who loved, who chose truth over silence, and who finally believed he deserved to be loved in return. The night wrapped around them, cool and quiet, but inside Daniel's heart, there was only light.